Thank you very much. I think we needed to wake up. So Arafat, you provided that very, very nicely. Okay, so I think I want to thank my four panelists for very rich and thought-provoking presentations. So I would now like to open up the floor in the limited time we have. Now, I think we can have Q&A for about 15 minutes, and we will conclude at 4:30. By now, you should know the procedure. There are two mics. Please step up to the mic, and when you ask your question or make your comment, keep it very brief. State your name and your affiliation, and please indicate which panelist you're addressing your question to. Please go ahead. You're first.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Eugenia Kemble. I'm with the Foundation for Democratic Education, and I go back all 17 years with Radwan and this organization. I'm deeply troubled by some of the comments on this panel, particularly from Luke Peterson and Alexis Thompson. I really don't understand how you can paint a picture of the United States relationship with Israel that characterizes it basically as a neoliberal corporate concoction to keep Palestinians down. And that's the way I read what you said. I am deeply concerned about the development of democracy in all the Arab Spring countries. And I've worked on the development of democracy internationally virtually my whole life. I think it's important for this group to recognize that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Does that make it perfect? No. Do I agree with all of its policies? No. But it is a gross simplification of our relationship with Israel, which does stand as an example for the rest of that region, as some kind of neoliberal corporate plot. I deeply reject that notion. I'd like to have some comments on where is the money coming from that supports an Hamas that digs tunnels under the borders and sends terrorists into Israel to throw bombs. I'd like to know
I'm going to ask you to, however, keep your comments brief.
All right, let me go to the second.
Get to your question, please.
Okay, I want to hear some response to these concerns. Alexis Thompson, I just want to quote this. You say that if moral authority is constructed within the group, it is immune from external criticism. That, to me, is an extreme form of moral relativism. What are we supposed to do? You say tit for tat is no good with respect to terrorists. Are we just supposed to let them kill people? I really am dumbfounded by some of these remarks.
All right, we'll let the panelists respond.
I didn't, so it's a straw man. I wouldn't say that Israel is a neoliberal concoction. I never said that. That's not what I would say. In fact, if you recall my first comment, you had your comment, all right, and now I'm going to comment because you asked me to respond, so here's my response. That's how this works. So I didn't say that. And in fact, at the top I said the agency of the two national factional groups that are involved in the Palestine-Israeli conflict is their own agency. I don't want to take that away from them on either side. Both have legitimate claims to nationhood. And in fact, the bulk of my paper was about the national claims of both people. But the panel started so late, I was cut down and cut down and cut down. So I gave a very amended and a very abbreviated version. And it's interesting also in your comment that you say, it's an oversimplification to use the frames of neoliberalism, and in the next moment you say Israel is a democracy, full stop. Well, I would call that a gross oversimplification, right? Especially when there are 5 million citizens under Israeli civil control that do not vote. So explain to me how that actually works as a functional democracy. That's my response to that.
Okay, Alexa?
I'll just say briefly that, defining authority as being from within doesn't say anything about the value of the authority that's constructed. It doesn't create an equivalence or any sort of value between them. So, which means that it's not moral relativism.
Okay. Please.
Hi there, Kurt Bassiner, Democratization Policy Council. My question is for you, Professor Peterson. How would you square your neoliberal idea with the Israeli essential nationalization or state taking of private Palestinian land? Because it seems to be upside down from the general thrust of your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, the Israeli neoliberal tradition, it deserves a lot of examination in its own right, and it's a very fair point. Again, didn't really have the latitude to delve into that. And in fact, what's interesting is that some of these confiscation processes that Israel engages in are actually designed as land to be designated as public use, which are old Ottoman land laws that were designed for confiscation. So that's actually a really good point. And in their tradition, that should be, I really should account for that somehow better. My main thrust was dealing with the more internationalization of the idea of neoliberalism and the Israeli aspect of that in their own policy. In fact, my structure subsumes their neoliberal tradition, and perhaps that's a theoretical flaw, but your point is well taken.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Alex Norris. I'm from the National Endowment for Democracy. I'd like to, if I can, start pitting the panelists against each other. So Alexis, when you talk about sort of our moral authority and their moral authority, I know there's not just two moral authorities. There's this sort of overlapping ethics that people may think that they share at least elements of an ethic with, what you call the terrorist ethic. And I feel like Arafat's project in Pakistan has some relation to this, where it basically says you're using these authorities as your sources, but you're wrong about the authorities. So how do you view that sort of project? And Arafat, how do you view the way that you draw the authority for, what you, the slides sort of near the end, you talked about this overlap between sort of international human rights law and Sharia and the Hanafi school. So how do you sort of construct that authority in sort of your ideal situation?
I think, I don't know Arafat, but from what I saw, I was intrigued and impressed by his willingness to think seriously about what it means to construct authority and how that comes around. So if you're asking me what I think about him and what he's doing, I am impressed and would love to learn more. The whole thing about moral authority, so one of the things that we tend to do is to see it as this entity. And one of the things that you said is there are different moral authorities, right? And my point isn't to say someone's right and someone's wrong, or we have things in common or we don't have things in common. It's more to bring out the point that if I make an argument about how someone interprets the Quran incorrectly, my ability to make that statement is directly related to my interaction with them. And that interaction is precipitated on the environments in which we cohabitate or interact in some way. So it's not a matter of whether we share some moral authority or as an entity, but to understand the interaction that happens and what that means for the quote-unquote us and our ability, and by us I mean people who are not terrorists essentially, right? Like how do we entice and engage people who do choose to involve themselves with a terrorist ethic? It is a complicated question, but the answer as far as I'm concerned is not we have the moral high ground, we set the example for how people should live their lives, therefore we just need to spend more money and work harder and drop more bombs, and everyone will see what we're doing and sort of come our way. It's meant to complicate the way that we think about our ability to effect change among those people who choose a terrorist ethic. Hopefully that responds somewhat.
Yeah, the little thing that I added at the end was supposed to be a big thing, but the whole idea is that, our focus is squarely on equal citizenship, which is a modern concept in Islamic legal tradition. In the pre-modern times, the contract between non-Muslims and state was defined by a dhimma, which was a social contract of sorts of protection, but had limitations on their speech and exercise, right? Now, all those rulings that I showed you were for dhimmis, right? That in spite of those limitations, these are the rights that you have. Now, when I say a common ground between fundamental rights and international covenant is that we have agreed upon some fundamental basic rights, which is a contract, and we have agreed within the state as well as internationally. So within the state, now we don't have a dhimma, we have an ahad, which is an equal citizenship ahead, which means there's no second-class citizen. You know, the protection stays. So the argument is that an ethical and principled reading, because Islamic legal tradition is not a monolith, right? There's no Islam, there's no one Sharia, right? The good Sharia, the bad Sharia, let's find one that, you know, looks good, right? That never works. An ethical and principled reading of Islamic legal tradition will show you a lot of rich, complex, competing narratives and principles that animate them. When you understand those principles and you animate them in the contemporary context, the contemporary contract, I believe, it's my faith that you can find solutions to blasphemy, apostasy, forced conversion, expression of religion, churches, synagogues, church built, all these things that used to be a problem. I hope that answers some of the questions.
Thank you. Okay, please.
I wanted to ask Dr. Thompson about my name is Katerina Dallacura, I'm from the London School of Economics. I wanted to ask Dr. Thompson what he means exactly by moral authority. Do you mean relationships of sort of a hierarchical relationship, someone who lays down the law, who lays down the correct interpretation and the others follow? Or do you mean the ability to debate the text, and perhaps what Mr. Mazar is doing in Pakistan is more in that tradition, sort of which text has moral authority? So it's a little bit ambiguous if you're referring to people or to a text. If it's the former, I think we who place so much emphasis on it may be to some degree misguided. What I read in the situations of radicalization often is that it is the group that matters. It is what your peers are doing. It is what your friends are doing. So it's not necessarily the older guy or the more experienced guy or the more sort of knowledgeable guy telling you what to do. It's more sort of following the cool group and going down that route. So I think our solution, which is to give an alternative moral authority, may actually be a little bit irrelevant at times, because it is more the type of stuff that Mr. Mazar is doing, which is more relevant.
Thanks, that's a great question. I would actually take it a little bit further. So the word I didn't use in my presentation, even though I was being insanely academic, is dialectic, right? And the concept of a dialectic is that there is a one, another, and then there's an interaction between the one and the other. And the one could actually be more than one, and the other could be more than one as well. And authority isn't a thing. It's not a person, and it's not a text. It is that interaction between people and text and communities. We see it very clearly among teenagers who run around in packs, right? You know, so this is a clear way to see sort of the wisps of moral authority as not as necessarily as an example, but as an analogy, right? It's not authority, but that feeling and that sense when you're around teenagers and it's like 8 o'clock at night and they're sort of restless and they don't know where they're gonna go or what they're gonna do, but there's something happening between them. And this notion of authority takes us away from people without leaving people behind, and it takes us away from text without leaving text behind. And it looks at an interaction that happens in between all of that, and it recognizes a few things that I think are really important. And one of those, which I didn't have a chance to say, is that it's ephemeral, and that it's perspectival, and that we can't get our hands around it, and we don't know what it's gonna do next. So if we stand up and say, we have this thing called moral authority, and we're either going to replace or instantiate or reform or fix or kill that which we understand to be the exemplar of moral authority among them, then we fail. Like our strategy has already failed because we fail to understand the nature of the thing that we're trying to deal with. You know, I was a quote unquote counter-terrorist for a very long time. And we know very much that we can't kill our way out of this problem, right? And we can't fund our way out of this problem. So what's next? It is to characterize and then strategize based on a different understanding of moral authority. Thank you.
Did you want to add anything to that, Arafat?
I think the question was aimed at
Okay.
Professor. So if you have anything specific to ask me, please.
Well-
I didn't see a question.
No, but I think I'm going to abuse my privilege as the moderator to
Yeah.
ask the last question, and it is directed at you. So I'm kind of curious, have you made similar presentations in Pakistan itself? And if this is becoming better known, and if it has had any impact in the legal discourses then surrounding the blasphemy laws for non-Muslim minorities? I mean, how well known is it within Pakistan, and is there any discernible difference in the legal discourse?
Yeah, so I would say I've done a lot of these in subcultures, right? Like in elite liberal universities, sort of like preaching to the choir. But I keep saying that preaching to the choir to change their tune, or that you're not in key, that you're barking up the wrong tree, or that you're using the wrong discourse. But also, we've been able to co-opt a lot of seminaries. So a co-opt. People like Mufti Taqi Osmani eventually came up after an animation of these research went viral, and he came up and he said, yeah, according to Hanafi tradition, they can't be killed, but there are Hanbali, Shafi, and Maliki traditions. And that's where our research went further, that those traditions are talking about saghar, about subordination. And we also write and try to contribute, and these madrasas organically already have scholars that are talking about it. It's just that when you make it about the hero phenomena, right? You're in the media and you're giving sound bites, that's when things escalate into a binary. It can work well, I think, A, through stakeholder engagements, and B, through some sort of groundwork with madrasas and seminaries to ensure that they have a better idea what citizenry means, and international community pressure, especially from Muslims. So what does Al-Azhar have to say about it instead of amnesty? What does Zaytuna College have to say about it instead of State Department, right? And that would really work. We've made a lot of headway, I would say that myself, but I think it's a long journey forward because we don't just want to change the word in the legal textbook, but in the minds, the social narrative has to change, and that has to come from within with help from outside. Because remember, even the slavery in Ottoman Empire, there was a lot of influence from the outside before it got abolished. So you do end up needing influences from outside. It just has to be respectful to the indigenous resources.
All right, well, thank you very much. I think we're going to end this panel on that note. Shall we have another round of hands for... I've also been asked to convey the sad piece of news to you that we're not going to have a coffee and tea break. We will start our final panel immediately, so if the next panelist could come up to the podium. But it is available outside, so you feel free to nip outside and grab a cup.